The All-Canadian Telegraph line from Dawson City, Yukon to Vancouver, British Columbia was completed on September 28, 1899. It both transformed the North and was an integral part of the Yukon Territory becoming a defined region of Canada. It helped solidify Canadian sovereignty. It was a 5-mile-a-day challenge to build this telegraph line that ran through some of the most difficult terrain in North America. The famous Klondike Gold Rush in Dawson City, Yukon, was over just days before this spectacular feat was completed. However, this back-breaking telegraph line existed because of the madness of gold rush fever. In 1897, telegraph technology had already been in use for 51 years. The telephone was the new kid on the block. People had become very used to sending and receiving telegrams. Like the digital natives of today, most of the prospectors of the Klondike Gold Rush were telegraph natives. They had been born well after 1844, when Samuel Morse had sent his famous message, "What hath God wrought?" For them, sending a telegram was the normal practice, similar to contemporary norms for us, such as the internet or cell phones. In the Klondike Gold Rush, greenhorn prospectors carried with them their ignorance of the North, as well as their assumptions about technology. Conmen were at the foot of the trail, ready to pounce. One of the most notorious conmen in Skagway, Alaska, was Soapy Smith. In 1897, he set up telegraph poles and wires, and a telegraph office replete with modern-day equipment and official operators. He charged $5 a telegram and received messages back, all stating, "Please send money." He had a lot of customers. There was absolutely no real telegraph service in Skagway until well after the murder of Soapy Smith, which was in 1898. The completion of the All-Canadian Telegraph landline was a necessity as well as an enormous accomplishment. The Klondike Gold Rush, the need for a northern telegraph line to the south, and Canadian sovereignty all had interconnected parts to play in the development of the North and of our Canadian Arctic front. I will now interview Dr. Greg Finnegan of the University of Saskatchewan's International Centre for Northern Governance and Development.
Hello, my name is Pamela Morrissey and I'm here today with Dr. Greg Finnegan. Hello, Dr. Finnegan.
Hello, Pamela.
I'd like to ask you some questions about history of the telegraph in the Yukon and how that affected Canadian sovereignty and political institutions of the day.
Oh, certainly. Just to give you some reference, my background's in historical geography. I hold a doctorate from York University. Presently, I'm an adjunct professor at Yukon College, so I live in the North, and I work at the University of Saskatchewan's International Centre for Northern Governance and Development. So, on the issue of the telegraph and moving into the Yukon, and specifically the All-Canadian line, the Telegraph Trail, that has a number of significant elements to it for Canadian history and historiography, and for the history of communications in essence, because it's one of the first attempts to connect the core, the Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, Vancouver core of the Canadian economy at that time, with the far north resource frontier, so that you could have instantaneous communication between this remote, distant place and where the decisions are being made for investment, particularly the banking industry. So by being able to connect the frontier, this remote Yukon gold rush in the 1890s, to the center of the economy, you're able to allow for economic decisions to be made quickly, investment decisions to be made quickly, and on a political front, there's the issue of sovereignty. Canada's boundaries were still very much in doubt in 1898. The United States was a aggressive, expansionistic country. Alaska had recently been purchased from Russia by the Americans, and the boundary between Alaska and Canada was still very much in question. And the other element, of course, to remember here is that a fair majority of the miners coming into the Yukon were actually Americans. So there was always a successionist perspective that the Canadian government was fearful of. By being able to connect Dawson with Ottawa and or Southern Canada and through to Ottawa via the Telegraph, that was able to give the Canadian government a stronger position vis-a-vis the United States on decision making in the area. Allowed for communications between the Northwest Mounted Police and the field militia that were here with decision makers in Ottawa.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, our technologies are far-reaching, and we have anything from using Skype, instant messaging, the telephone. We have many ways to communicate instantaneously with one another across vast distances across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how is this related to how people use the telegraph or telephone in 1899, 1900?
Well, this is a really interesting question because, in a sense, the telegraph used a hidden language in Morse code, or a specialized language in Morse code. It wasn't everybody who could sit there and tap out a Morse code message. As such, and given the limitations of how much you could put into a message, the telegraph was a limited technology. For its time, it was a breakthrough technology, but when we compare it to the telephone, which is just on the verge of becoming a major business tool circa 1900, Bell Telephone, for example, was already in the Canadian Northwest, what becomes the Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, BC, circa 1900. So the telegraph itself coming into the north was an important technology. It was very hard, of course, to bring the telegraph north. You literally would have had to survey a line through an incredibly dense, remote wilderness with dangers from nature on every side and climate. Then you would have had to build it physically using poles and wire it and bring it north. This would have been an incredibly challenging feat. So one of the challenges in using the telegraph, it's a limiting technology for communications, is you have to have a very, it's a contextual language. So you have an addresser, let's say it's the Government of Canada, sending a message through to its agents, which would be the Gold Commissioner in Dawson. And there would have to be a very specific element to that message. It couldn't be chatty, it had to be specific, short, and tight. And that's one of the limiting technologies in that time period with the telegraph. You could not really expand on a specific issue using the telegraph. It was very much a short, specific notification type message.